All right, we'll get started. Welcome to Engineering with Rosie Live. In this one, we're going to be talking about the role of mining in the energy transition and, is it a decarbonisation problem or a necessary part of the solution? And I have a great guest with me today, chemical engineer Marc Allen, who longtime viewers might remember from the video that we did together on carbon capture. So if you haven't seen that one, then you can check that out. We'll put a link in the description. So I am going to get Marc to introduce himself properly in a second. But in the meantime, I'm keen to hear from you. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from and what are your thoughts on mining as it relates to climate change and the energy transition? And first of all, I need to start by thanking the sponsor of these live streams. It's WeatherGuard Lightning Tech. WeatherGuard makes strike tape, which is a retrofittable lightning protection system for things that go fast, like wind turbine blades and aeroplanes. So these live streams wouldn't happen without their support, so big thanks. And also the whole Engineering with Rosie channel is supported by the amazing Patreon community, who I always ask for questions ahead of live streams and before I do interviews for my regular videos. Okay, so Marc, could you please introduce yourself and tell us, what your background is, what work you've done with mining, and what you're doing now? And I'll try and fix my headphones while you're doing that.
Sure. Good luck with that. So hi everyone. My name is Marc Allen. So I'm a chemical engineer by training. I have worked in a whole bunch of different industries. Spent the first part of my career working in operations, actually working in industrial gases and in the hydrogen industry, which was back then just sort of this area that you worked, and there were no colours for it. Now it's obviously a big part of the decarbonised future, but a lot of that time was spent actually servicing the mining industry. So I was supplying them with hydrogen and oxygen and other things. I worked fly in, fly out on a nickel mine for a good couple of years in my career, and then moved into sort of engineering roles where I was doing simulation work for the mining industry. And then 15 years ago, in 2007, decided to concentrate on climate change and sustainability as sort of the thing that I was interested in doing. So I've been working in sort of energy management, decarbonisation, greenhouse gas emissions estimation, climate change strategy for a whole number of companies. Done a lot of work across the mining industry in gold and nickel and copper and some work in iron ore, and I've traveled to so many mine sites, and they're all the same at the end of the day, and they all look pretty similar. And the challenges are quite similar across mine sites as well. So I've just come back to Australia after 5 years in Singapore, running my own climate change consulting company, and now I'm a climate tech entrepreneur with a company called Unravel Carbon. So we're a sort of an online enterprise software for estimating and reporting greenhouse gas emissions, including Scope 3 emissions. And here we go. And it looks like my website's on the screen, so that's very exciting. So.
Yeah, and I have managed to fix my problem, so I did catch most of that. So that was awesome. Really interesting background that you got, and very relevant to the topic today. So that's great. Okay, so who have we got calling in? We've got Andrew Wainwright calling from Dorset, UK. So that's not a convenient time zone for you, I don't think,
not
Andrew.
A convenient time.
Thank you for joining us. I always appreciate when people are calling in from watching from the middle of the night. So he's expecting to hear that mining is going to be the hardest industry to make sustainable. Just quickly, what do you think about that, Marc? Is it?
Look, it's going to be challenging to make the mining industry sustainable. Mining in and of itself is an unsustainable act. You're extracting minerals and you're not putting them back again, right? But there are ways in which we can improve the sustainability of the mining industry, and of course think about what we're doing downstream as well in terms of materials recovery and circular economy and all this interesting stuff that has an impact on overall sustainability. And will actually potentially have a material impact on the mining industry, depending on how much we can recover and how well we can redesign our things too. But it's going to be challenging, no doubt. Everyone needs to decarbonize.
Okay, so today we're going to, I'll just briefly go through the topics we're going to talk about. We'll talk about what are the most important critical minerals to the energy transition, who's mining and processing them, what they're used for, and whether there are alternatives, what are the emission sources and other environmental damage they cause, and other already green alternatives. And hopefully Mark can also mention some existing projects or talk about, some of the progress that's being made. So I'll just go to the poll. I did a YouTube poll on this topic. So I asked, is mining a decarbonisation problem or part of the solution? And actually, I was a bit surprised by the results because I hear really a lot of talk, a lot of articles and commentary saying, we need to stop mining to get to zero emissions and a safe climate. You constantly see articles saying, oh, you thought EVs were, clean technologies. Well, actually, it turns out that you have to mine minerals to make them, and you can substitute that for any physical climate technology.
Yes.
Yeah. So I don't know. It was a surprise to me when I started hearing these articles because I'm like, well, I don't think it was really unexpected that anyone thought you could make physical products without, starting with raw materials somehow.
Dude.
So it's a bit weird. But yeah, I was happy to see only 5% of people who responded to this poll thought in, that kind of binary term. 13% on the pro mining side. We need to mine more critical minerals for batteries, etc. And I would have included, like electric motors and generators in there as well because, I just didn't have space for that, enough characters for that. And then the biggest category is mining is both a decarbonisation problem and a solution. And that's definitely what I think. Mark, what do you?
I think that's fair. You're certainly right that this whole binary thing of we mustn't mine anything is actually really challenging. It's not really a tenable position to be frank, because everything that we have comes ultimately from being extracted from the earth at some point, or it's grown in terms of food, but. I would tend to agree, I think, with the poll that, mining is a challenge, needs to also decarbonize like everyone, and needs to improve sustainability like everyone. But we need the outputs of the mining industry, and we'll need some of them in much greater quantities in the future.
Yeah. And I think, yes, I can criticize people that, are like really anti-mining in just overall in any circumstance. But I think you could also criticize people that thought, well, we've got to push ahead with the clean energy transition. So who cares what the consequences are? We just need to, dig up as much lithium and rare earths and cobalt as possible. And who cares? Who cares what we do to the local environment or the local people?
That's right. We can't do that.
So, no.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I just wanted to talk a bit about the scale of the problem, like where mining fits into the global emissions, I guess is a better way to say it. On a whole. So mining is currently responsible for about 4 to 7% of greenhouse gas emissions. So that's between 1.9 and 5.1 gigatons of CO2 equivalent of greenhouse gas emissions globally. Then I got this figure from McKinsey report. So you can see that the majority, like really the vast majority of emissions come from fugitive coal bed methane that's released during mining. So I think, mining is a big problem for greenhouse gas emissions, and there are emissions, I guess, associated with all kinds of mining. But if we can get clean energy technologies that mean we don't need to mine coal anymore, like it's hard to see how we're not going to come out very, very, very far ahead on the whole emissions from mining topic.
Yeah, and that's a fair comment, right? Energy minerals, whilst they've been awesome to get us where we are in terms of economic development, right, and cheap energy sources, but probably the time is being drawn on sort of that industry, I guess, and huge impact on emissions should we stop mining coal for for power.
Yeah,
in particular.
yeah.
Metallurgical coal, that actually has a purpose at the moment as well. But maybe that's going to be phased out with hydrogen in the longer term as too.
Or electrolysis, as I covered in a recent video on steel, and I've got another one coming up. Actually, I was at Boston Metal a few weeks ago, and they let me tour around their facility, and they're attempting to go coal free for steel at least. But no, your point's accurate for a while yet in steel and some other stuff. Like I think silicon processing is harder to get rid of the coal from that. So anyway, more video topics to go on some of the individual topics that we'll raise today. Okay, but coal, emissions released from coal mining is 1.5 to 4.6 gigatons, and then compare that to power consumption in the mining industry. That contributes 0.4 gigatons of CO2 equivalent. The metal industry contributes roughly 4.2 gigatons, mainly through steel and aluminium production, and coal combustion for the power sector contributes up to roughly 10 gigatons. So I guess if you consider, what's used by these, or what's done with these things that we dig up. And I don't want to talk a lot about scope 1, 2, and 3 because I find that quite a boring discussion, but it does make
that's what my business does.
That's why you get paid well, I presume, to do it, because it's not the really exciting thing. But I do think a lot of companies can argue that scope 3 emissions, which is what their customers do with their product, a lot of people could argue that they're not responsible. But if you're digging up coal or oil or gas, what your customers are doing with that, right? So
it's fair.
I think when you see LNG projects, natural gas projects that claim to be carbon neutral, but that's not including when you use their product, that's a bit meaningless from my opinion. Okay.
Yep. We won't get into that argument today, I'm sure.
No, I think we're already off track. I've done too many tangents. So I did want to say one of the Engineering with Rosie patrons phrased this issue in a really nice way. He said more renewable energy projects means more mining for minerals needed, and more renewable energy projects also means less mining for coal needed. So who is going to win that race? And I think we've already talked a bit about that, Marc, but what's your opinion on that?
Look, I think ultimately, I hope, so think of this in terms of the context of what decarbonisation is required, right? And, to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement, we all have to be net zero emissions by around 2050. And that target's not going away, right? And that's governed by physics. So it's a difficult target to try and miss, right? So to do that, yes, we'll need to decarbonize the energy system. We need to decarbonize sort of all industry, including the mining industry. But of course, decarbonizing the energy system means that, in the terms of that quote, you would favor critical minerals and mining of those sort of essential things for the energy transition over, mining of coal or burning of coal at the end of the day. I think the impacts from coal burning are much higher than the potential impacts from increasing sort of the mining industry in these things that we need. And plus also there are a lot of ways to decarbonize the mining industry. And far fewer ways to decarbonize the coal-fired power industry apart from turning it off or sticking the CO2 underground. They're really the two choices, right?
Yeah, which we have talked about, and I will do some more videos on that as well, the topic of carbon capture and usage or sequestration. Let's keep pushing on. I've got a couple other comments. Squirrel Girl's calling from Argentina, expecting to hear about mining related to renewable energy, like lithium mining. They're very relevant.
What a great segue.
Very relevant for an Argentinian, and exactly, introduces us nicely into the next topic, which is critical minerals. So what is a critical mineral? I have the definition here. It's a metallic or non-metallic element that has two characteristics. One, it's essential for the functioning of our modern technologies, economies, or national security. And two, there is a risk that its supply chains could be disrupted. And there are a bunch of published lists. The Australian government has one that they're, updating from time to time. The US has one.
Of course, that's a very political definition for for critical minerals, isn't it? That's what it's all about.
And I know
country security.
Yeah, and I mean it is important. People are starting to realize, started with the disruptions from COVID, and then later, with the war between Russia and Ukraine. People have started to realize, it's not great if there's something that we desperately need and only one country can give it to us. Then they've really got us over a barrel if if that relationship goes badly. So I think that's fair enough. And it is also interesting how important these lists are. I know the Australian government just updated ours recently, and that has a huge effect on the companies that are playing in those space. Like if you're working on one specific mineral and then it gets added to the critical minerals list, then all of a sudden, fundraising becomes a lot easier, and you can move faster. So I guess that's the point of why governments would make these lists. So.
Yeah. Well, it is, and also to encourage, I guess, investment within their own countries if there is a deposit that's not yet been sort of tapped or processed. Then we could be a little push to get them along also. Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, there's tons of stuff on here. Not all of these are like super relevant to clean energy technologies, and so I wanted to ask the viewers to say what are the minerals that you're most keen to hear about. So we've heard lithium, that's definitely going to be on there. And we'll probably get started with lithium and maybe, was it nickel? That was the other one,
yes.
Marc, that you wanted to talk about. So while we wait for some comments to come in, let's get started with those couple. I just want to talk about what they're used for, where and how they're mined and processed, environmental impacts, what you can do to reduce those, like CO2 and non-CO2 environmental impacts. So let's get started with you choose between lithium and nickel.
Well, I'll pick lithium first, just because it's the one thing I think that people think of when we think of what the energy transition means. People start thinking about batteries and electric vehicles, and they go, "Oh, where are we going to get all the lithium from?" And that's a big deal. And of course, when people start talking about life cycle assessment of internal combustion engine cars versus electric vehicles, then the argument always comes up, what about all the mining of the lithium, right? And because there's a lot of lithium and a lot of battery, I guess, within an electric vehicle. So it's the sort of thing that'll become really important as, of course, electric vehicles get sort of used more through, the countries of the world as well. So the lithium, its key use is in batteries, or its key projected uses in batteries. They're going to be pretty widespread in the future, right? So a lot of countries have now got mandates around electric vehicles or policy positions around phase out of internal combustion engines, which then drives this demand. And of course, even with the recent change of government here in Australia, new EV policy sort of being floated, and things to make EVs cheaper, particularly by states as well, so grants and things like that, which then drives further demands in batteries, and then of course all of the batteries that are going to be used for home storage and grid storage and energy storage around everywhere. Now, of course, it remains to be seen whether lithium-ion batteries remain to be the dominant technology, particularly when we start going to grid-level storage.
And I think that will depend a lot on how the price goes. You know, if people talk a
Of
lot about a
course.
supply crunch for lithium, and if we have one, then we'll use different kinds more, and if we don't, then I think lithium
Yep.
ion is pretty good. But can you tell us about
Yeah.
where and how it's mined and processed? Because I know I did do a
Sure.
video on this as well, and we'll put a link to that in the description too, with Alex Grant, who's the big lithium guy. So he talked a lot about the two different kinds or main kinds of lithium deposits as the hard rock in Australia and then the other brine in South America. I mean, there's more deposits of both around the world, but I think, those are the main things. Can you tell us about those two processes and what the environmental impacts are for each of those?
Yeah, sure. Look, the hard rock mining process, which is probably the process I'm closest to, particularly, normally living in Western Australia as well. There's a couple of lithium mines that have sort of started and shut, but pretty typical sort of hard rock mining process. So, we mine the rocks, and that uses obviously vehicles, so mobile equipment for mining operations, and then send that to a processing plant where it goes through a grinding circuit and gets turned from big rocks into little rocks, a process called comminution, and then processed into lithium carbonate normally, where then we get shipped off for downstream processing. So, in terms of environmental impacts,
it's pretty classic mining then. Like you're digging up rocks and crushing them. That must have a lot in common with all kinds of other kinds of mining. So what's the possibilities? We've got a question here from Hamash Abdulaziz. Electrifying all mining operations, will it be possible? Is that the solution for this kind of like dig up rocks and crush them? Is it electrification, hydrogen? What's the solution?
Yeah, it's going to be largely electrification. That's certainly what I see. And then, of course, in concert with that, decarbonising the energy system that goes into a mine site. A lot of times, particularly in Australia, mine sites are remote, right? So don't have good access to the grid. So they end up being powered by diesel, or if you're lucky, you've got a natural gas pipeline, so you can power by natural gas, because gas is a little bit more expensive than diesel. Of course, all the mobile equipment is also diesel powered. Now, in terms of electrification, we're thinking about electrifying two things. So the mill and the processing plant is always, electric powered, but like I said, it comes from diesel generators for the most part here in Australia. When it comes to electrifying mobile equipment, yes, there's a lot that's been done, particularly in underground mining. There's now battery electric vehicles. Of course, that needs more lithium, but there are battery electric vehicles for underground operations. There's Kirkland Lake Gold Mine is running purely electric. There's a couple of other sort of proposed gold mines that are looking at doing electric fleets. And that's possible because the trucks are actually a bit smaller. So when we talk about open pit mining and big iron ore mines, those are really big trucks and they need a lot of batteries to move them around. So that's where it becomes really challenging, and we start thinking about what other ways do we have to electrify? So, having electric motors and trolley assist, so pantographs on top of the trucks that go up to like tram lines and moving them around in that way makes them a little less flexible. But that's one opportunity. And then, there's a number of players talking about using hydrogen fuel cells for these really, really large trucks. So lithium mines are not the same scale as an iron ore mine, so you don't need such huge trucks. So there is certainly opportunities. Hey, there's a trolley assist now. So there are opportunities for electrification of the mobile fleet, and that's an area of great interest. Then, of course, powering a mine site with renewables, that certainly makes sense today from a cost point of view if you're using diesel, right? Because you can just pay for your renewables plant by not burning as much diesel, because diesel's so expensive. So that has a business case today. Now, the issue
especially in Western Australia.
How do we store?
Especially in places like Western Australia, where you got just tons of sun and pretty good wind as well. So I think I should definitely get someone on the show that is working on a project like that to talk about it. Someone, maybe Fortescue's doing a lot, and maybe some other people.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I do think electrification of the mining industry is possible. It just does depend on the scale of the mobile fleet at the moment. Yeah.
Okay, let's move on because I cut you off while you were trying to talk about processing. So I think that's a good place to go back to. Got a question from Ostrich Wrestler, who's calling in
Yep.
from or listening from Vancouver Island, Canada. I have never been there, but I would love to. Heaps of good
Same.
skiing and mountain biking in the area and surfing, I think. So yeah, he or she says, while I see and hear about decarbonisation efforts, I don't often hear of efforts in reducing more localised pollution like tailing ponds. I would like to, though. So what can you
Wow.
tell us about,
Yeah.
like how is lithium processed and where
Yeah,
and why?
and that's a great point. When we start to talk about the other environmental impacts of mining, tails is certainly one of those things because, when we mine stuff, we're mining it basically at really, really low concentrations. So you end up moving a whole lot of stuff, a whole lot of the rock that bears the valuable mineral that we want, right? And that all of that is effectively waste, right? And it goes out to tails dams for the most part. And tails dams have indeed been in the news in recent years in terms of overall operation of them. And of course, there was the big Samarco disaster in Brazil a few years ago as well, where the tails dam sort of burst and went through a town. Now, there are some advancements in sort of minimizing water use in mining, right? And then having less water that's contained in the tails that goes out to tails, which actually makes the job of managing that operation easier, right? But you do end up with this basically big sort of mass of stuff that you didn't use. So the gangue material, the non-valuable material.
And what is that
and
in lithium, for example, or what minerals is that really bad for? I assume, or is tailings? It can vary because you don't know what's in the rock you started with.
Yeah, tailings varies because it's the everything else that's in the rock, right? So you separate out the valuable stuff, and you have a whole bunch of different processing techniques depending on sort of what's in the rock in the first place to get your valuable stuff out. But then the invaluable stuff basically just contains everything else, and it could contain, right? There's huge issues with something called acid rock drainage, where you have wet tails and it actually forms like a sulfuric acid, and that if that leaches out into the environment, that's really bad. Or it could be relatively benign. It could just be a whole bunch of rock that's really fine. One of the issues is, of course, it has all been ground, so it is all really, really fine by that point. It's not like it's rocks. It's 80 micron particles that are sitting out there, and over time the water evaporates out, so you end up just with this almost like mud, if you like. It's this bunch of sand grains with not a whole bunch of water in them. And there's not a lot that you can do about that. When a company closes a mine site, they are actually meant to rehabilitate the mine site as well, and figure out what to do with the tailings, maybe put it back into the pit that you actually took everything out of in the first place, or refill it back into the underground workings. But to the extent to which is that's done, obviously depends on regulation and regulators.
Okay. Here's a good relevant comment from John Lee. In Utah, Magnesium mine is reprocessing its tailings because of the lithium in the tailings is now economic. And I know there's a lot of stuff that's how, like, the best the best deposit is in tailings from other kinds of mining.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. And sometimes there are valuable materials in there that can be reprocessed, and you actually get to save a lot because you don't need to crush it and grind it as much. And a lot of work sort of going on in reprocessing of tails from other mines that might have valuable material that's now sort of worthwhile getting, or even in the case of the gold industry, they're going back and reprocessing gold tailings because it's got a whole bunch of gold in it, right?
Right. Okay.
That's leaked through.
Okay. So we had a similar comment from Peter Ross. Presumably the tailing rock is also valuable to other people and processes.
Can be.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it absolutely can be. Yeah.
Okay. I don't want to use all our time up on lithium. Can you tell us a bit
Yeah.
about nickel? Was the other one you mentioned that it doesn't get
Mm,
talked about as much, but you think it's really really important. So can you tell us why you think nickel is so
yeah.
important?
Um, so a lot of the battery, uh, particularly EV batteries and other batteries as well, have a whole lot of nickel content in them, right? Nickel's a pretty mature stuff that's been around for a long time. And the processing of nickel is reasonably well defined. But um, there is a lot of nickel contained within a battery in the battery chemistry, right? And particularly, you know, requirements for high grade nickel sulfate um, are expected to increase in the future. So nickel, you know, we sort of split into two types of nickel, sulfide nickel, and what's called laterite nickel. And we process both of those in Australia actually.
Mm. Mm.
BHP, when they purchased Nickel West a long time ago from Western Mining, they have a whole lot of sulfide nickel, which is, you know, generally processed again, crushing and grinding, and then that goes through a concentrator, so it turns into, so there's a flotation plant, turns into a concentrated nickel product, and then they send that to a refinery and process that into nickel briquettes, or in the case of BHP in Kwinana, they actually have a dedicated nickel sulfate plant now, specifically for battery chemicals, making really high grade nickel sulfate. Just inked a deal with Tesla as well to supply them with their nickel requirements. Right? It's all about having good
Okay.
traceability in the supply chain.
And is
So
nickel
yeah,
a big
a lot of use.
Is nickel like it's a pretty normal thing that is not a new thing we care about since the energy transition. So clean energy
Right.
technologies like batteries are a large user of nickel worldwide, or is it small compared to its uses for other applications?
Yeah, well, so most of it's used in stainless steel
Okay.
manufacture at the moment. Yeah, so but battery, you know, uptake of batteries will increase that demand. And I think from memory, I think it would actually double the nickel demand. So it will be a large contributor. Today, it's not a massive contributor, but it will be in the future should, you know, all cars be electric, etc. And we're using a lot of storage
Okay.
elsewhere in the economy. So yeah, and you know, it's not a new process. There is quite a lot of nickel around, and deposits of nickel still to be processed, but it's sort of enjoying a bit of a renaissance
And are
at the
there
moment.
any specific environmental concerns related to that?
Well, there are. So certainly some processes, particularly the sulfide process, because it contains a lot of S, right? So when it contains lots of sulfur, what they're doing is, you know, smelting concentrate in some cases, right? So
Mm.
basically putting that through a high temperature process, and that generates a lot of atmospheric pollution, a lot of sulfur dioxide and sulfur trioxide. So you know, as the sulfur gets combined with oxygen and gets pushed off into the atmosphere to get you sort of a purer product. Nickel laterites, they're sort of low percentage, again, low concentration. So again, lots of tails that need to be, you know, considered, and what do we do with that? Nickel laterite processing uses a lot of acid and a lot of hydrogen sulfide, and a lot of all, you know, it's an aggressive high temperature process. The plants need a lot of energy, and generate a lot of other atmospheric emissions as well, atmospheric pollutants. So,
Okay, and if you've been mining nickel and valuing it for a long time, have we
yeah.
already solved these problems? We can scrub out a lot of those things we don't want released into the atmosphere or into waterways. What are the solutions?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is treatment, I guess, at stacks, and, you know, meeting environmental regulations, which of course everyone does, right? So there may be a question around whether environmental regulations get strengthened over time and become more stringent. But I suspect the technology does exist to sort of minimize the amount of nasty stuff that goes out into the atmosphere.
Okay, so we've got a couple of suggestions for minerals to cover. They weren't on the list of ones that I prepared or pre-warned you about. So,
okay, let's cross fingers and hope they're okay.
Yeah, let's see. So we start with Peter Ross, who asked about magnesium, and that was the same person who made the comment about. Oh no, it's different person. It was John Lee who made the comment that a magnesium mine is reprocessing its tailings. So
Yeah.
I've got no clue what what magnesium's used for. Do you, Mark? Put you on the spot.
That does put me on the spot. I've never done anything in magnesium mining. I've dealt with magnesium in the nickel mining industry before because you have to get rid of it. But
okay, and
yeah,
is that tricky to get rid of it?
Oh, you end up basically precipitating it out and pushing it out to storage somewhere else. You know, if you can get it out as a carbonate or something like that, then it's generally quite benign.
Okay.
So
I've just done a quick Google search. Used in products that benefit from being lightweight. Yeah, I guess you add it. It's in steel alloys. I don't know how much.
I knew that about magnesium. It is used for lightweighting. Yeah.
And also added to molten iron and steel to remove sulfur. Yeah. Okay.
There we go.
Yeah. So we're going to have to move on because. Sorry.
I was going to say in school science class, it's cool to set fire to it. That's about the extent of my magnesium knowledge now.
I think I can remember doing that too. Yeah. So sorry, Peter, we couldn't answer that question better. That's the risk when you can't prepare everything. Okay, and then sodium is the next one. But sodium must be so easy to get, right? I mean, in the ocean, you can get.
Sodium's easy to get in salt combined with chloride. Yes, sodium is around everywhere in sodium chloride, and sodium's pretty abundant. Now, as far as I know, it all comes from brine at the end of the day. In terms of use cases, sodium has been, because it exists in that same area of the periodic table as lithium, right? So it's been discussed in batteries, in battery chemistry as well, and something that certainly could be important. And I guess one of the key things I always like to think about in terms of batteries themselves, and that's of course, if we end up in this area where lithium supply is much lower than demand, which seems to be like a likely outcome, then of course the price of lithium goes up, which then of course means researchers start looking into other things, and maybe that's high sodium batteries, or for grid level storage, maybe it's the use of vanadium in redox flow batteries, etc. So there's people are pretty innovative, and they start to try and find other solutions, and a similar thing has already happened, I guess, with cobalt, also a mineral that's used quite a lot in battery chemistry, and now of course Tesla are using zero cobalt batteries because they're concerned about all of the sort of potential social issues with mining of cobalt. And
can you just quickly say what those are? It's a nice little segue to talk about cobalt, which is one of the ones I definitely wanted to hit on. Why are people so upset about cobalt?
Yeah, there's a lot of probably the only way to refer to is like artisanal mining, and
I think that's a nice. I'm
trying to sugarcoat it a little bit.
Refer to it. But handcrafted by small children, I think, is the problem, right?
Yeah. So and sometimes called illegal mining as well, right? In places like the DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, and a lot of focus on the cobalt mining industry as a result of that, because there's a lot of deposits over there, and then a lot of people mining in very unsafe conditions, and potentially sort of miners who hold the leases. Some of the companies sort of almost turning a bit of a blind eye to what's going on within their mine sites.
Congo isn't the only place with cobalt, right? I know we've got it in Australia, and I assume that there's other places too. Why aren't we just getting it from countries that don't use child labour? Isn't that a simple solution?
That would be a simple solution, I think, right? And don't quote me on this, but I think the supplies coming out of other countries are just not enough, right? And there's a little bit here in Australia, and it's often associated with nickel as well. So like how this stuff just appears on your screen as well. But
that's Kevin. Actually, the viewers remember Kevin from previous live streams, so everyone can say hi and thank you to Kevin.
There is some in Australia. There is some in Australia and deposits all around the world. But it's and sometimes, of course, it is all about the story too, and that's the world that we live in. There's a lot of focus on mining practices in Africa, and the whole industry gets tarred with that same brush as well. No matter where you're coming from, and then of course that drives innovation in other areas. So people go, oh well, cobalt must be bad, so let's find ways to not use cobalt.
Yeah, I think that's a story with batteries in general, right? There's so many different ways to make a battery. So if lithium is a bottleneck, then we'll move to sodium or something else. You can also just use less batteries, pumped hydro or flow battery, or any of the others, like dozens of different technologies. Yeah, If you don't want to use cobalt, you don't have to use cobalt. Is that true for all the problematic things? You mentioned that.
Oh, it could be true. I think lithium itself is really good at what it does. But in the future, one would expect there would be advancements in battery chemistry, and of course, as I mentioned, using the right battery, I'll rephrase that: using the right energy storage in the right context, right? Because lithium ion is great for electric vehicle batteries, but there are other applications where it might not be the preferred way. It's just sort of the way that happens now, because it's almost the most advanced, because it's had more money put into it.
Okay, and maybe we can go back, Kevin, to that chart that showed the different proportions of minerals in batteries, in EV batteries at least. Actually, the other point I wanted to make was that on a different one, the sodium versus lithium battery, pros versus cons, then that was, its energy density is the main thing that lithium ion batteries have over everything else. And that was really great when you were powering your Walkman. I'm sure, Mark, you're probably old enough like me to have had one of those.
I did, yes.
Yeah. And I mean, even before that, people were carrying around, like big stereos. So that's really important for mobile applications, but we need a lot of grid storage, and who cares how light that is really. So I think that there's definitely heaps of potential to move into other things.
Interestingly, if I just reflect on, of course, concepts around circular economy as well, and of course that's going to impact the mining industry and sustainability of the mining industry too. But perhaps home storage or even grid storage is a second life for EV batteries once they start becoming less good at holding their charge. Then when you're storing energy for a house or storing energy for a grid, it doesn't really matter if you can't sort of get to that 100% anymore, or if it discharges slightly quicker, because you're just sort of storing some energy, right? So maybe that's a thing. And of course, reprocessing of batteries, recycling and removing the lithium again and reusing it is an area that is being studied a lot, particularly in Finland. So they've got the whole battery recycling group up there at Aalto University doing some really amazing stuff in hydromet take apart lithium batteries and get all the cool stuff that you need, all these critical minerals out again, and then push them back into new service.
I've always found it a weird argument that people, well, like people who are really anti batteries or anti energy transition. I don't know what their reason is, but they say on the one hand, lithium is going to be so expensive that we won't be able to afford it, and on the other hand, we're not going to recycle any batteries. And it's just like, well, I mean, obviously, an old battery is a much more concentrated source of all the minerals that you need to make a new battery. Why, if it's so expensive and so in demand, why wouldn't people start to mine old batteries instead of mining fresh sources?
Indeed. The tricky thing, the tricky thing is actually if you expose them to too much air too quickly, then you might end up with them getting set on fire, which is a bit annoying, I guess. So, but I was just reading the other day about some battery shredding technology that works under a nitrogen blanket, which is apparently coming online and becomes a way to assist with recycling.
Okay. So I think, that's we don't have that many batteries to recycle yet. So for me, that's the main reason why we haven't solved all this stuff. But then as this commenter pointed out, Kaiser Rusum, recycling battery materials is good, but you can't recycle your way to expanding the fleet. And
fair.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fair. And oftentimes, obviously, because of the laws of thermodynamics, you're not going to get 100% out again each time you do this. I guess. So
apparently not according to Northvolt. Northvolt's chief engineer says one battery in, one battery out about their recycling.
Oh, okay, sorry. Oh well.
Well, I don't believe it.
Incorrect.
I mean, come on. The laws of thermodynamics do generally say that things have to be added. So. Maybe it's just energy, in which case I guess that's kind of true. But they're not wasting a single atom. I don't know. I am super duper keen to get over to Northvolt though, and and see what they're doing and make a video about that sometime when I can get to Europe.
Yeah, cool. Yeah.
Okay, we're running out of time, and I really want to talk about rare earths before we have to wrap up. So
sure.
And Kevin, if you can maybe go back to that screen that had the different minerals in batteries, and we can see rare earths on that one. You can see it's this like tiny little dark stripe at the end there. So it's not much.
Super
and it's
important.
Super important. It's not just in batteries, right? I know, like in direct drive generators. Yeah. So here we are in offshore wind, especially where they're using direct drive generators. You can make your generator way smaller if you can get some rare earths in your magnet and get a really powerful magnet that way. So so what can you tell us about rare earths, starting with maybe where can you find them? Are they really that rare?
Well, they're rarish, right? So one of the big issues is you find a lot of rare earths in China, which is, I think, an area of concern for a lot of countries. I'm not going to get involved in the politics of all of this, but
I think it's safe to say people don't want such a concentrated supply chain. If all the rare earths are coming from one country, it doesn't really matter what country it is. That's not ideal. It's not very, there's a risk. Yeah,
indeed. And that is, I think, the thing that people are concerned about, because yes, they are important. They're not important in massive quantities, as you pointed out, but certainly important for the energy transition. And you've already mentioned, things like wind turbine motors, could absolutely benefit from having rare earths in them. So that supply chain and that concentration of that supply chain is a concern. You do find them
and
sometimes associated with mineral sands, but sorry.
I might have interrupted you to ask you the thing you were about to say, but why is it so concentrated? Because my understanding is that rare earths are pretty much everywhere in small quantities. Yes.
Correct.
So what is
they're
it
not
that
actually that rare?
Yeah.
um,
Why is
the
China making most of it? Is it the mining, or is it the processing? What's the part that for some reason China's sorted out that the rest of us can't or won't?
yeah, look, well, I think there's a couple of things. So one, yes, rare earths are quite well dispersed, I guess, right? But unless something exists in a concentrated enough quantity within a deposit, then there's not going to be economic to mine it, right? So you can have these things everywhere. You know, I could have rare earths sitting in this room at the moment, but it's not going to be cost effective for me to extract them.
You just start mining
So
your hotel room.
I can.
I'm going to
I do
keep your
think the hotel would like that
security
very
deposit.
but anyway, they are often associated with mineral sands as well, and you know, there's some deposits in Australia, in Western Australia. That there's some, but there have been some issues, I guess, around the processing side, and there is one company who I won't give the name of, but people can look them up, who was processing rare earths in Malaysia, and ended up with quite a bit of backlash because their tails are actually slightly radioactive, which, you know, obviously people are not so keen on living near or being near, right? So so they've been in sort of protracted issues around that processing step. So perhaps, and you know, just thinking out loud here, perhaps, you know, there might be easier to do such things in China. I don't know. Yeah, but that is, I guess, one of the issues with them. I guess the slightly radioactive nature of some of the components inside a rare earth mix that we're mining.
Yeah, definitely the coverage that I've seen is that even in China, you know, they're getting really terrible environmental outcomes, and the people that live near to them are suffering from it. I don't know about the accuracy of these reports, but the impression that I got was that other countries just simply don't want to deal with the environmental consequences. And I haven't really been able to figure out if it's because you can't process without causing environmental problems downstream, or if it's just that it would be more expensive to do it that way. I mean, we've still got 15.5% in the US, and I know that they're expanding. They've got a new mine, or they're reopening a rare earth mine in Nevada, I think, recently. And then some of these other countries. I mean, Australia. I hope that we're not just. I guess that maybe if they're mined somewhere where there aren't people around, but there's definitely going to at least be Indigenous communities and stuff. So is it possible to do it in, you know, a nice friendly way for people that have to live nearby, or is it not? Is that the whole problem?
Yeah, look, well, I guess I'm a bit optimistic that I think anything is possible, but you do have to throw money at it to get it to that point. So, you know, there is a trade-off ultimately, you know, to have economic processing, or the price of them has to go up, right, to be able to pay for those additional environmental controls. So, yeah, my view is all that pollution is generally treatable, right, with enough capital and with enough equipment. I guess it's an area where I guess you and I align. It's you know, there's often engineering solutions to these issues. It's just a matter of, can you deploy them economically?
Yeah, and I do see that now was a really good time for, all of a sudden everybody's woken up to the idea that you got to diversify your supply chain, and or even better, you know, get stuff locally. So, I mean, I'm excited as an Australian. You probably feel the same. Like, we've been doing the dumb thing for so long, you know, just dig up rocks and ship the rocks overseas for someone else to get all the value out of it. I'm really hopeful that we can, you know, start doing more processing and manufacturing in Australia. And I don't want to see the environment, being the victim of that change, though. So, is it possible to do it all correctly, or are there some minerals, do you think, where it just really, we just have to take the hit? We have to accept that there's going to be environmental destruction for the greater good. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm not sure I like the phrase environmental destruction for the greater good, to be frank. Right? I do think we need to do things responsibly, right? And as I said right at the beginning, the mining industry needs to continue. We can't do without the mining industry, and there are certainly improvements that can be made. And I think we have to be mindful of environmental stewardship, and do things.
But I mean, does
like
then be a trade-off? That's what I'm asking. Do we need environmental destruction, or can we do everything that we need to mine? We could do it in a way and that minimized it and then rehabilitated afterwards, and it's just a matter of cost. Because I mean, you can't argue that at the moment mining does cause environmental destruction. Not every single mining project, perhaps, but there are plenty of examples of mining that is, causing environmental damage, and that's why I think it gets such a, a bad reputation. Is it unnecessary? We move forward to a day where mining is just another thing that we do, and then once the mine is finished, it's rehabilitated, and you never would look at that and say, oh, that's a devastated site.
Yeah. Well, look, I think it's possible to do that. Now, there are of course challenges. Right, filling in a big open pit is really, really challenging to do, and which is why we end up with these pits everywhere that eventually just fill with water, and maybe the view should be actually we repurpose that into something else.
Yeah,
becomes, not a tourist attraction, but you know what I mean. It has some other use after mining. So it's a big lake then, but certainly in some areas, like if you look at the alumina industry, they're doing sort of closer surface strip mining, and generally they're very good at rehabilitating. And there's certainly areas where companies have mined alumina before, and it doesn't even look like they have, because they've replanted everything, and they're getting back to nature. And in fact, if you look at what's happening even up at Ranger in the Northern Territory, so right in the middle of Kakadu, and they're going through a rehabilitation process with that right now, and that was a uranium mine, and replanting tens of thousands of trees, and trying to get it back to what it was as well. So look, it can be done. It's just about how do we do that? How do we enforce that, right? And this is where I think regulation has a large part to play. I see the role of policy and regulation as a way to address market failures, and that there's not really an incentive for a mine site or a mining company to rehabilitate just based, almost purely on social license, but might need a little bit of a regulatory push to help that along.
Yeah, I mean, I would be really interested to cover some of these projects. So maybe if you know anyone that's doing good work in that area, Marc, and later on you can let me know, maybe make some introductions, or any viewers, if you know any cool work in this area that's being done near you, then let me know so that I can keep it on my list of potentially interesting projects to cover. And then I did think this comment from John Norris ties up nicely with what you were just saying. Marc, if the experts could control the process instead of politicians and accountants, then we could possibly do it without all the negative side effects. And I constantly think this about the energy transition in general. It's like, just get an engineer to project manage this thing instead of politicians and everybody else, and then we'll get it done faster and cheaper. But yeah, I guess you ignore the politics to your peril. I've tried to learn that lesson. What do you think?
Indeed. Well, what one heartening thing for me, so a very personal anecdote, but one of my very good friends has just made it to Canberra and is in this current parliament, right? So she's actually my local MP, and she's an engineer and climate change consultant, and very clever and knows a lot about climate. And it's actually really, really interesting and refreshing to actually have, a science and engineering person in the House of Parliament, right? And as opposed to a lawyer,
so
which is what most of them are.
So few engineers in Parliament, so that's cool. There are a couple, and they usually do a better job, in my opinion, as an engineer. I'm obviously biased, so yeah. Okay, so I need to start wrapping up, but there's so much in there, and there is, just a huge number of potential topics that could be whole videos, where you can cover one issue in a bit more depth. So would encourage anyone watching this either now or later on to leave in the comments which areas are the most interesting to you, so that I can, target. I can't obviously make every video on mining, but I definitely am really interested in this moving forward. So I just need to wrap up with some thank yous. Thanks to WeatherGuard Lightning Tech for sponsoring the live stream. They also have a great tech newsletter and a podcast, which I co-host each week with Alan Hall. And we've got a new co-host too, Joel. The links are in the description, and we talk about clean energy tech news. It's a lot of wind, but also other stuff. In the latest podcast episode, we talked about a couple of new wind turbine tower techs, including wood laminate towers. And I did see the comment earlier from somebody who said, if we just make everything from wood, we won't need any mining. So some people are trying. I came down pretty against the wood tower as a potential climate solution, but yeah, that's just because I'm no fun at all. So anyway, so check out the podcast in your favorite podcast app, or you can watch it on YouTube. The links are in the description. Also need to thank again the Engineering with Rosie Patreon team for their support, and if you want to join, then the link for that is also in the description. Biggest thank to Marc for taking the time to come talk with us again today. And I look forward to following your new venture and your success. So excited to hear more about that and see how you go. And thanks to everyone for watching, especially those who called in from Europe. I'm sorry I can't make the live stream suit Europe and the US and Australia, which is really the two main audiences are the US and America, and I value my own sleep, so I don't wake up in the middle of the night to make a convenient time frame for all of you. So great. So thanks a lot for joining us. Thanks, Marc. Thanks, Kevin, for your behind the scenes work, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Cool. Thanks, Rosie. Thanks.